Hey guys, and welcome back to Monka, where Sayonara ensues, but yesterday I beat a video game, and so I kind of want to talk about it. And from that weird little intro, you might be able to guess that yesterday I beat Sayonara Wild Hearts. Now, Sayonara Wild Hearts is a 2019 game. It was developed by Simogo and then published by Annapurna. Now, I've never really heard of Simogo. I actually kind of looked at their pedigree. I recognize some of the names of the games that they made before, but I've never really played any of them, to be honest. This came out on the PC, Xbox One, PlayStation 4. It came out on iOS as well, and of course it came out on the Nintendo Switch. The game is really short, to be honest. It took me an hour to beat. Now, of course, since it only took an hour, I actually doubled up and I beat it twice. Once in the regular mode and then once in arcade mode, just to kind of get a feel of the game overall, you know. I feel like the first playthrough I didn't absorb everything, and so I went for a second one. Shit, I might go for a few more because honestly, it's a really enjoyable game. You could probably play a few times and still be pretty good, but Sayonara Wild Hearts as well, on the topic, is a visual audio auto-running game. Not really a rhythm game, but it is very heavily based on audio and visual. It describes itself kind of like as a pop album game, as they describe it, which is kind of interesting. But overall, my opinion on Sayonara Wild Hearts is that it's a really good game, to be honest, and it's really enjoyable, especially for how short it is. It feels like it packs a lot of content into that 1 hour. Now, would I recommend it for $13? I'm not exactly sure. For 50% off, I could see this being a very good deal, to be honest, but for what is otherwise an hour of gameplay, like I said, I'd recommend 2 playthroughs. I don't know if it's worth $13, but I'd definitely say it's worth $6. But in terms of the graphics and performance, the graphics are pretty cool, to be honest looking. They kind of have this look that'll probably stay timeless. It's kind of almost voxel based. It's very hard to describe, but the graphics are very unique and they have their own style. I think they'll stay pretty timeless, to be honest, and they look pretty good. The color palette is pretty neon though, to be honest, and there's a lot of flashing colors. So the most prominent colors in the game are usually purple, pink, and black, and it is very flashy. So if you're epileptic, I'd imagine that this would be a game that you would not be able to play. But in terms of the performance, I mean, on the Switch, there's not a lot going on, to be honest, that would really bog down the system, so it runs perfectly fine. 60 frames a second, absolutely no hitches. It is perfectly fine. I had not a single flaw in terms of performance when playing this game. But in terms of the graphics and performance, the graphics are pretty cool, and I think they'll be honestly pretty timeless, to be honest, and the performance runs perfectly fine on the Switch. It should run perfectly fine on everything, to be honest. But in terms of the music, this is a big part of Sayonara Wild Hearts, along with the visual aspect of it. The music slaps, to be honest. Like, this soundtrack is an absolute banger for most of the songs, to be honest. There are a few songs, like maybe like single on one hand I could probably count the songs that aren't really all that great, to be honest. Like, there's some songs on here that aren't like amazing, but I'd probably say those songs are okay at worst, to be honest. But for the most part, this soundtrack is full of a lot of bangers. It's very heavy EDM inspired music, so if you like that type of music, this is a lot of bangers in this soundtrack. Honestly, I listened to the soundtrack a few times after beating the game just to pick out some of my favorites, and I had a hard time picking my favorites out though. My top 3 are probably Dead of Night, Heartbreak 3, and then Wild Hearts Never Die. But like I said, there are a ton of bangers on this soundtrack, and so those 3 are by far my favorite. Dead of Night is bar none, in my opinion, the best song in this entire game, but the soundtrack is an absolute banger, with the exception of a few songs that are just really tame compared to the rest of the soundtrack. Like, the rest of the soundtrack is banging for the most part, and then you have these weird songs that are kind of tame in comparison, which just don't fit the thematic, to be honest. When the soundtrack is bumping is when this game's at its best, and when they throw in those like few songs that are kind of laid back, it just kind of feels weird, to be honest. But otherwise, this song is bangers almost all the way through. But in terms of the voice acting, there is no voice acting, so we'll just skip over it. In terms of the sound design, I don't have a lot to say as well, except for the fact that during the QT rhythm parts, when you hit a perfect, the sound effect for hitting a perfect is really satisfying. But in terms of music, it's a big part of why you'll be playing this game, and honestly, like I said, with the exception of a few songs, this is bangers all the way through, to be honest. But in terms of the story, I'm not going to talk about this too much because, to be honest, it's an hour game and I don't want to spoil too much. But from the opening, and what they tell you in the opening essentially is that there were 3 arcana that held the balance of the world when a evil arcana, along with their 5 henchmen, kind of took over and threw the world into disarray. Now, at that point, the 3 arcana set out to create a sort of superhero from a female that had a broken heart, and when she gains powers, she pretty much sets off to stop the 6 arcana that are wreaking havoc. That is all I'm going to say about the story because I do not want to spoil it. It's only an hour game. That's what they tell you, like, within the first maybe 3 minutes of the game, within the opening exposition. Otherwise, a lot of this game is actually told through visual aspects. Like, they don't do a lot of storytelling through verbal dialogue or anything like that. Queen Latifah does do the narration for the game, and I believe she just narrates the beginning and the end of the game. Otherwise, the story is told through mostly visual aspect, which I enjoy enjoy, to be honest. I think that visual aspect and that kind of low-key storytelling is actually done really well. As well, a lot of the thematics they have throughout the game and a lot of the themes and morals are also done really well. The characters are also something that there's not a lot to talk about because they really just don't have a lot of character building throughout the entire game. But in terms of the story, it's pretty good, to be honest, except it's very simple. But I like the thematics and the morals that they have throughout the game. I like the fact that as well they tell a lot of the game through visual aspects rather than doing it through dialogue. But in terms of the gameplay is a 3D auto running game, something almost in the vein as I would compare it to like 3D Sonic auto running segments, or something maybe like Temple Run, or like any other rhythm game, something like maybe Audio Surf is something that came to mind when I thought about it. The game is not heavily rhythm based though. You'll pretty much be running on a 3D track, going left and right, collecting points and also avoiding obstacles and stuff like that. As well, there's parts where they change up the gameplay, so maybe you'll be riding on a motorcycle in first person, whereas in other parts of the game you'll be doing it in third person. You'll also ride on other shit like skateboard, cards, dragons. There's also a voxel based part of the game where you'll be progressing through an area in first person, and there's also a side-scrolling auto-scrolling part where you'll be auto-scrolling through an obstacle area, and there's also even kind of a bullet hell level. They have a lot of creativity in terms of the game design, to be honest, and I really enjoyed it a lot. The gameplay element really helps with the music part as well. You have a lot of parts of the gameplay that will sync up with the music, and it's really cool, and it really plays into this really cool, you know, visual gameplay music experience that's just really unique and isn't done by a lot of games. But it isn't really a rhythm game, so to speak, to be honest, because your actions within the game sometimes line up with the music, but the musical part doesn't bleed too much into the gameplay. At points it does. There are QTE rhythm based points, which is kind of cool, and like I said, at some points during the gameplay the music lines up with what's happening on screen, which is pretty cool. But otherwise it's not really a rhythm game, so to speak, which is why I kind of called it an audio visual auto runner. It really isn't all that much of a rhythm game, but at some points it does do some pretty unique stuff with the music and gameplay. Like at one point there was a track where there was some snapping, and every time it would snap the track would change to an alternate universe. That was really cool, to be honest, and they do a lot of cool stuff with the gameplay. I don't want to dabble too much into it because I don't want to spoil too much, but it's a really cool experience with the gameplay, and it's really flashy and fun, to be honest. It's just really enjoyable experience that, like I said, I'll probably go back and replay again just because of how enjoyable it was. But in terms of gameplay, it's really enjoyable and really complements what's going on with like the audio visual side of the game. But overall, Sayonara Wild Hearts is a short and sweet experience that's really enjoyable, to be honest. And I would highly recommend playing it. This was one that I was actually going to skip on because it really didn't look like my game, but when people said it was short, I was like, what the hell, I'll pick it up and play it. And I really am glad that I did, because it's just a really enjoyable experience. I think a lot of people can enjoy even if you don't like rhythm games, because like I said, it's not really a rhythm game, and at the very worst it's just an hour-long game with a banger soundtrack if you don't like it that much. But I think a lot of people enjoy this game, and I highly recommend playing it. I would say pick it up at a discount though. But thank you very much for watching, and until next time, I'll see you. Stay chill.